This wind turbine incident, for example, is one that I have a 1-hour presentation where I start and I take this thing and I put it together and show you each piece. But in the interest of time, I'm going to just have it already put together, and we're going to talk about the key elements of the accident. We're going to talk about a lot of different accidents here, things that don't seem to have any connection. But when I get it all done, I'll try to put it all together for you in some things that people can do to help prevent accidents from occurring. Okay, so let's talk about the wind turbine. Let's see, I go right? Yeah, this was in 2007. We have, if anybody travels Highway 84 out toward Pendleton, you've noticed the wind farms that are all over in Oregon and Washington Hills out there. And they go up fast. They're fast-paced because of the funding that occurs. They'll take and bring this equipment onto the site. They'll do all the prep work. They'll put in this huge concrete foundation. And they'll actually, a crane will come in, set up on the job, and they'll set one of these things up in a day. It goes really quick. And just a little bit on what this thing involves is the unit. In this case, it was about a 250-foot tower from the base of the nacelle, which is the motor house, down to the ground. And then the tower is actually 3 sections. I'm sure you've seen them going down the freeway with pilot cars. They're just huge, big tubes. And they're bolted together, a section 1, section 2 section, and then the 3rd section on top. There's a ladder, it's interestingly enough, that goes, well, you got a ladder that goes to the 1st deck, and then you have a ladder that goes from the 2nd deck all the way up to what's called the yaw deck. And that ladder is like 190 feet straight up. It's got a ladder climbing safety device, so you got a harness on and a fall protection device, but you've got to be in pretty good physical shape to be climbing that thing every day like the maintenance guys do. And it's a regular part of their work. They have experimented with some elevator type operations or ladder climbing assist devices, but it's still primarily climbing ladders every day. The nacelle, this unit up on the top is called the nacelle, the motor house, and it houses the transmission and the generator itself. Now it's interesting, this thing turns about 14 to 16 RPM. Those blades, as they turn around, these 150-foot long blades turn about 14 to 16 RPM, and that causes, it's like a 1 to 91 ratio for the transmission, the yellow thing in here. It causes the generator itself to turn at 14 to 1600 RPM. Big increase in speed, but it takes that in order to fire to get enough power for the grid. And then the nacelle, this unit with the generator and the transmission actually weighs about 82 tons. I want to point out that there's inside of the unit, for maintenance purposes, there is a disc. I don't know how well you can see it from here, but you're welcome to come up and look afterward. But kind of like the disc brake on your car, there's a disc, and then there's a brake pad. And I think if it isn't stuck, I can take the brake pad off. It's quite like the brake on your car. It's simply a pad that applies pressure to the disc, and it's used to stop the thing. When the maintenance is occurring, they come and they apply the brake and they stop it, and then they can turn this thing when they're doing maintenance. They frequently have to climb into the hub in this area here to do maintenance, to check these blades to make sure they're pitching the right direction and at the right angle, and to do service inside of there. And they have to line up a hole in the hub with a hole in the nacelle so they can climb in it. Does that make sense? So they line that hole up, and once they do that, I'll cheat a little bit in the interest of time. I'll line it up myself. They'll line the hole up, and they'll put a pin, a locking pin, in that shaft, in the disc. Does that make sense? So that they can walk in and out of here. They're working on it. Guys climb up. There's 3 guys in this particular crew working on the thing. They put this pin in. They can crawl in here, do the service they need to do. When they're in here, they have to shut these blades off because they're automatic. If the wind's blowing hard, these blades will feather back so that when the wind hits them, it won't cause this to turn, or it'll change the speed that it turns. If the wind's not blowing very hard, they can turn them flat to the wind, and it'll cause the thing to turn faster, and so they can keep up their 14 to 16 RPM. Does that make sense? So they can adjust the blades depending on how fast the wind's blowing. That's pitch of the blade. So what they do is, in order to, when they're doing service in there, those blades still want to turn because there's a computer in the bottom that tells them to turn. Well, you can't have them turning while you're standing down there, or you'll get your feet broke, because there's, let's see if I can see what the thing looks like. That's looking up into the first section from the bottom where all the computer equipment is, just to give you an idea of what it looks like inside of one of those things. This is a picture looking back on the weather station that controls the speed, the pitch of the blades, and how which direction the thing is pointing. It has to point into the wind, obviously, to take the wind correctly, and that's yaw. The thing will turn. If the wind's coming from over here, it'll turn over this direction. If it's coming from over here, it'll turn this direction. So when you're going down Highway 84, you may see those things turned at different directions at different times of the year, depending on where the wind's coming from, or different times of the day. They'll switch as needed. But they'll turn the yaw off when they're doing maintenance so that it won't turn, and they'll stop that. But these blades still want to turn depending on the speed of the wind. In order to stop that, once they get in the hub of this particular brand, they have a valve they have to shut off, and that's what this red valve is. It stops the things from moving while they're working in there, and so they can go ahead and do their work. They shut off 2 valves, and then the one that they're working on, they may have to use a remote control and pitch this to 0 degrees or to 90 degrees, and then check and verify what angle that blade is actually at versus what the computer says. That's kind of their annual testing they have to do. So they turn these valves on and off as needed. Now, this is the locking pin that I was talking about. I used the bolt. It's actually a big pin, and it fits through a housing into the brake disc. This is that hole that goes into the hub. And in this case, you can see the cover is on it. It's got a cover. You've got to open the thing up and then line up the holes and then put the pin in before you can climb in there. That's a picture of the head technician. He's got his feet down inside of the hub, and he's got his head sticking out of the hole in the hub. So it gives you, from my model, a perspective of what reality is. And this is those pitch control valves, the red valves that I was telling you about. They're down in the bottom next to each one of the blades, and you simply have a lever to activate or deactivate it. And now the crew, this whole thing is based on inexperience of the crew. We've got a new process, we've got a lot of wind farms being built, and we don't have good, experienced people. The gentleman that you just saw with his head sticking out of the hub, he is the most experienced person. He came from Germany. He just came over to help get the crew so they knew what they were doing to teach the crew their routine maintenance activities. The rest of them, Thomas, he's the technical advisor. William, he's an apprentice technician. He helped with the construction. He's got 7 days total experience with wind turbines. Chad, the apprentice technician, the victim in this case, he had a month and a half of experience working in these things. Dustin, an apprentice wind technician, it was his first day on the job. And Nick was the site manager. He's been with the company for a month and a half. He's got 3 years experience on other brands of turbines. They were set up to do a 500-hour service, the first service of the wind turbine before it's turned from the manufacturer to the wind farm owner. So they're going to transfer ownership once the 500-hour service is done, and the technicians will stay with the farm. Make sense? Okay. And part of that job included that 500-hour service included blade pitch calibration, where they actually had to go inside the hub and pitch the blades and calibrate them. Now, the things moving fast. The supervisor on the job was scheduling the 500-hour service, and they had scheduled an inventory on Monday morning to inventory the tools that the crew had before the new company took over. The crew was just learning the 500-hour service, and they were in the middle of performing it, and when they were informed of the inventory needing to be done. So they asked the crew to stay on Saturday and finish their work up, and then bring the tools down at the end of the day so that on Monday morning they could be inventoried in the job shack half a mile away. And the head Nick, the technical advisor, Thomas, the technical advisor, he advised against it. He said, I don't think it's a good idea. The crew's pretty green. But Nick, the site supervisor, hey, I'm going to look good. This is going to help the company, and we need to get this inventory done. So they'll be all right. They can handle this. They can do it. But Nick had something else going. He could only be there for a couple hours in the morning. So he did a job safety meeting with the crew. First thing in the morning, they get together. He goes through what needs to be done, and then Nick has to leave. The crew goes up and starts work. At 7:40, they had the tailboard safety meeting with Chad, Dustin, Nick, and Bill. At 7:43, Chad, Dustin, and William shut down turbine W1 and began their service. At 11 o'clock, Chad and William entered the hub to perform the blade calibration. And that's what Thomas was most concerned about, was them getting in that hub and not having the experience. They went in to do the blade calibration, and they left and resealed the hub entry port just before noon. Now, you don't take a lunch break and go down to the local McDonald's. There just isn't one around there, and you got 250 feet to climb back up and down. They bring their lunch up with them. They have a crane that drops a wire rope down and bags that they hoist their stuff up. At lunchtime, they simply sat on the equipment and took a lunch break. And they all sit around and talk. And then Nick, who was working in the office, went home for the day. He left the site. And then at 1 o'clock, Chad, Dustin and William go down tower to torque bolts. I told you it was in 3 sections. They have big bolts, bolting each section together, and they have to torque them with huge machines to make sure to the right specifications. They're down there working on the torquing, or they get started on the torquing process. Chad stays up in the nacelle, and he's going to finish cleanup. They've got some painting to do and some just various things to finish the maintenance process. At 1:30, Chad discovers his cell phone's missing. Now Chad is he's out of Glendale, Washington. He had been working at the hospital there, And he really thought this wind energy was, like many of them, was up and coming thing and the great thing to do. So he took this job because he wanted to be a part of it. And he still had ties to the hospital. Matter of fact, he was really strong with the union. And he was running for union president. And he was still in the running. They had signs all over Goldendale, Chad Mitchell for union president, and it was a big deal. And he had a meeting he had to go to on Sunday. And he had all of his contacts in that cell phone. So it was important to him to get his cell phone. He can't find the thing. He's looking all over, looking through the job boxes and the toolbox. He can't find it. And he calls down to William and Dustin and says, hey, you guys start calling my cell phone so I can hear and see where it's at. And so they do that. And then now, there's a data recorder, much like a black box in an aircraft, that records what's going on in these turbines. At 216, the data recorder indicates the blades were pitched to -2 degrees, flat to the wind. All 3 blades. Now, we surmise that Chad had taken and opened the door, put the pin back in, opened the door, climbed into the hub, and turned the blades, used the remote and turned the blades to see if they were somewhere down in, his cell phone was somewhere down there in the pivot plate. When he turned the blades, for whatever reason, he set those, the locking control valves. He locked the blades so they wouldn't turn. They would not turn automatically. At 3:59, Bill starts climbing down from the top section, and you can see in my model here, there's somebody climbing the ladder coming down. Dustin's already got down to the ground. He's at the pickup, and they're going to take the crane and start taking stuff out of the tower. They're done. They're completely done. Chad's up in the nacelle, and at 3:59, he pulled the pin on the brake and released the brake. Now, he had forgot to open those valves back up. This thing's facing the wind. The blades are pitched flat to the wind so that it'll go fast. And the wind's blowing about 35 miles an hour. These things start going. They're meant to go 14 to 16 RPM. It's going, and it keeps going at about 45 RPM, according to the flight data recorder, if you will. The blades are, these blades are made of fiberglass. They weigh 100, what do they weigh? Whoops.
82 tons?
I'm down to, you get it? 82 tons?
Yeah.
That's the nacelle. And the blades, they're somewhere down there where I can't see it. 25 tons each. They're heavy. They're made of balsa, and they're made of balsa, but they're really heavy. Anyway, they start flexing because of the pressure from the wind that's blowing them up to 45 RPM. And one bends far enough, it strikes the base of the tower. Not the base, but down near the bottom. William in here said he could hear the thing sound like it was just winding up. He could hear it going faster and faster and faster, and all of a sudden he heard a big bang, and then everything went crazy. Once you break one of these 20-ton blades, then have you ever had your washing machine out of balance? I mean, this is 82 tons sitting on top with these blades out of balance spinning. It started jumping around, and that's the result. Bill was perched on on a ladder bracket right up in here. The fire department was afraid to get him out because they didn't know anything about wind turbines. Nick come flying back to the scene, and he helped get him out. Chad was in the wreckage of the nacelle down in here, and he was killed. And you can see where it folded over. There's a couple spots on there, if you look close, where we found that where the blade had actually hit the tower and caused the first out of balance before it collapsed. And this is the hub. And yes, after we finally got the hub picked up and off of the scene, and underneath the hub was Chad's cell phone. He had left it in the hub of the wind turbine. And this is what the nacelle looked like. And you can see you can't see very well, but there's a big, huge gear laying here, and it gives you kind of perspective how you can get 82 tons just inside of that unit. So it's a lot of equipment, a lot of gear. And I guess, this was written on the side of it before I got done with my investigation, and it says, Dad, I will miss you so much. You're in my heart, prayers. You may not be here physically, but you are here in our hearts and souls. Love, you will never be forgotten, Kayla. And I guess I would say, from my perspective, it's important that we never forget, that none of us ever forget what happened there or in many of these other cases and the lives that are lost, because this was preventable. That Chad did not recognize the hazard. They only thought that if they forgot something, if they didn't get it right, they were the ones that had to climb back up the ladder and fix it. They never realized, they never recognized that thing could overspeed and fail in the way that it did.